container. Right now, we're actually going to go into what does the container even want to look like? Do we want to be monogamous? Do we want to be open? And I think a lot of people, when they enter their relationships, they make a lot of assumptions at what they think that they want. So they say, or a lot of assumptions on what they think the other person wants. Like, oh, it's okay if I do this, or it's not okay if I talk to this person, or it's okay if I dance with a bunch of people, or and I think it's really important to actually come to that clarity internally, and it's not just open or not open. And so Katie is here because she is an expert at this, and she's going to talk to us about this. So Katie, thank you so much for being at Emergence Festival, and you have the whole floor.
Thank you, Chelsea. Hi, everybody. I just caught the tail end of that last talk, and I think we're hopefully by the end of today, you'll all be determined to have regular check-ins with your partners, because that was a thing that I to really encourage. Well, I have an idea, something I've never quite done before at a Zoom festival, and I invite you to join me if you feel like it. If not, that's okay too, but I wanted to bring a little bit of movement into this at the same time that we're kind of feeling into, I'm going to give you a few different spectrums or continuums that affect the relationships that we're in. So things like gay, straight, poly, monogamous, even down to like who wakes up early, who sleeps in late at night. And I invite you, if you feel like it, to stand up and to find some space in your space where you can move from left to right a little bit. And actually see how much space you can take up. So you don't have to go rearranging your space, but just a little bit of room. And even if it's just like a hip width apart, we're just gonna get a little bit of movement that can kind of go along with some of these questions that I'm going to be asking you. If you are like really enjoying just chilling in your bed right now, or you're multitasking and just listening, you can just imagine where you might go as I'm asking you these questions, or you can just watch or whatever. Everything is an invitation, right? So first, if you are an early riser, you are up at the crack of dawn, like ready to face the day. Maybe go all the way to the right of your spectrum. And if you are a night owl, if you're just getting started at 10, 11 o'clock, you're up all night, you can come to the left. And notice that there's a lot of space in between, right? Or maybe sometimes it depends on your job and the season, right? So wherever you are, sometimes there can be movement too. Okay, so now if you are hyper organized, everything you own has its specific space, go all the way to the right. And if you are just like perpetually in chaos and your stuff is always everywhere, go all the way to the left. I know I mostly live over here unless I've got something important going on, and then maybe I like clean up because people are coming over or whatever it is, right? We move along these lines. Okay, next, if you are absolutely always stone sober, no caffeine, not a single drop of alcohol, no Advil, no Tylenol, all the way to the left. And if you take every drug you can ever get your hands on at any time, no matter what, all the way to the right. So where are you? I'm kind of in the middle. It kind of depends. If you are a cis feminine woman, so you were born into a feminine body and you feel like a really feminine person, all the way to the left. If you were born into a male body and you really identify with the masculine, all the way to the left. And again, remembering that there's a lot of space in between, right? And we're allowed to move. Okay, if your absolute ideal relationship is monogamy, just you and one other person, and you are their only person, all the way to the right. If you're like relationship anarchist, you don't even like believe in relationships really, you just do whatever you want, all the way to the left. Polyamory is somewhere over here. Take note, if you are with a partner right now, are you standing somewhere Are you taking into consideration where they are, where you're standing based on like you don't want them to know, right? Are you leaning a little bit because of a relationship that you're in? Okay, what about if you're super vanilla in the sex in sex? You just like missionary position all the time, all the way to the left. If you are kinky as kinky can be, all the way to the right, right? What about if you totally go with the flow all the time? You're just like you never make a plan, all the way to the left. If you like to have a strict plan and everything in place, all the way to the right. And again, hopefully a lot of you are playing with a lot of space in the middle, right? Now, let's say if you absolutely love curry, all the way to the right. And if you are not a fan of curry at all the way to the left. Now, okay, so now what if I told you, you can stay where you are, whether you like curry or not, right? Now, what if I were to tell you about the curry that I had last night that was absolutely incredible? There were like these peas in it that were like little explosions, orgasmic explosions in my mouth. And the sauce was like this perfect amount of like a tiny bit spicy, but so creamy, right? So if I really were to tell you about this most incredible curry I ever had, would it maybe might make you want curry a little more, right? Or if I told you about last week when I ate a curry and it totally ruined the inside of my body and I was just shitting my brains out for days, now you might like move a little to the left, right? So other people's influence can influence where we fall on the spectrum. Okay, cool. Thank you. That was the little movement piece. Thank you for participating and playing with me with that. And now, hopefully, no one's too hungry because I'm going to talk about curry in relationships and how they relate. So hopefully, everyone's had a nice lunch. Okay, so when I ask you, what kind of curry do you like? Do you like? First of all, when I ask you, do you like curry? Some people are like, yes, I love curry. Some people, nope, don't like curry. But also for most people, it's like, well, what kind of curry? Are we talking? Yes, it depends on the curry. Are we talking Indian curry, Thai curry? Is it spicy? Is it vegetarian? Right? There's a lot of different kinds of curry. Also, my mom once was like, I don't like curry. I'm like, how can you say you don't like curry? That's like saying you don't like soup. There's so many different kinds. Like, surely it depends what kind of curry that you, but my mom hadn't had a lot of curries. She had like 2 curries in her life and one was too spicy. So she decided she didn't like that, right? Anne needs rice. Okay, good. Megan likes all the curries. So there's such a vast like variety of curries that to say like, do you like curries? Kind of like, well, I don't know. It depends, right? Kind of like when I asked this question, are you generally like stone cold sober, never take a substance whatsoever, or do you love like all the drugs all the time? It's like there's a lot more questions to be asked, right? Like, are we having an intentional ceremony with some sort of like medicine that is being used for personal development? Or are we taking these medicine / drugs just to like have fun with our friends? Or are we taking these substances to avoid our own lives, right? Right, what is your definition of drugs? So where we fall on these spectra depends, like there's a lot of clarification that needs to be happening, right? Same thing with like on the polyamory and monogamy spectrum. And this is where so many people get kind of tripped up. Like, am I monogamous or am I polyamorous? It's like, well, first of all, there's a whole rich realm of possibilities in between those two. And if we are going to say like, I am polyamorous, what does that mean? What does that look like? Right? Because there's don't ask, don't tell polyamory, where 2 people just like don't tell each other anything, don't ask each other anything, but they just at one point kind of agree that they're gonna be allowed to do whatever they want as long as nobody asks and nobody tells. And then there's kitchen table poly, right? Where all the people involved in all the relationships sit around the kitchen table and pass the salt and, you know, and help with the dishes afterwards. So those are two very different ways to do poly. And so again, like two very different curries, right? Um, and then there's this question of like, with curry, do you like it spicy? Well, so I'm in Michigan right now. And as a general rule, when people around here ask me if I like spicy food, I say yes, because I do. Especially compared to most Michiganders, I love some spice in my food, right? But when I was living in Thailand and I went out to a Thai restaurant run by a cute little Thai lady and she asked me if I liked it spicy, I was always like, little bit, just a little bit spicy, right? Because the Thai definition of heat in food totally different from the Michigan definition of heat in food, right? So when I say, yeah, I like it spicy, depends on people's definitions of spice. And we come into this a lot of times in this question of like kink versus vanilla. Are you kinky or are you vanilla? Sometimes it really depends, right? On like, what's your definition of kinky? What's your definition of spicy, right? Sometimes we say like, yeah, I love spicy food. And then it gets delivered and it's like so spicy we can't eat it. And it's like, well, yeah, we said we liked spicy food, but all of a sudden, like, I need more rice. I need some milk. I need some aftercare here because like I thought I wanted it spicy, but my definition of spicy and your definition of spicy are different. So it's working with that and never being like, you said you like spicy, so you got to eat this, right? Of course not. It's like, whoa, this was spicier than I was anticipating. And like, this feels like a little bit much. Kink or vanilla depends on my partner. Yes, very much so. Because sometimes we have partners who really can like easily get into that energy and really like, nice, Ross is about to have some curry. Yeah, sometimes we have a partner who can really get into that space where they're like, yes, I like this. Whereas other times we have people who are really hesitant to get into that space. And so there's something to be said, a lot to be said, for always acknowledging the fact that like we move along these spectrums constantly, right? And maybe you really like curry, you love it, but then you eat a curry that just does not agree with you, right? And you're like, oh, I used to love curry, but then I ate this one curry that made me so sick, right? And I've seen that with people sometimes with like poly relationships where they're like, I'm polyamorous, I'm gonna date all the people and it's gonna be great. And then they get their heart just like ripped out and stomped on. And it's like, whoa, it makes people wary, right? In the same way that like that curry made you sick, that relationship made you think, I don't know if I want that. Right. And in the same way that like with curry, sometimes you might say, I am never eating curry again. And you don't. Like it was so bad that you're just like, you can't even smell it. Right. Or maybe you go off it for a while and then eventually you end up trying it again. And maybe when you try it again, it reconfirms that like, nah, I don't like curry anymore. Or maybe you try it again and you're like, oh yeah, I love this. I remember now. I love curry, right? I love being in an open relationship, whatever it is. We move along all these different spectra, right? And that's okay. And it's really important that in our relationships, we make space for ourselves to be moving wherever is authentic and also for our partners, right? Because if I enter a relationship and I'm like, I am polyamorous. And so I'm like, this is where I am. And my partner says, okay, right? And then actually what I wish I was like, I actually kind of want to be here, but my partner wants me to be more monogamous. So I'm like leaning this way because I got one foot where I want to be and one foot where I think I'm supposed to be. I can stand like this for a while, right? I can do this. Eventually it's going to start to hurt. Right now I'm already feeling it a little bit, but I could stay here for a while. But staying like this for a really long time is going to get exhausting. I'm not in my center. I am like feeling the burn of staying in a position that is not natural for me. And so sometimes sometimes a relationship might inspire us to want to move, right? And that's different from like feeling like we gotta lean. Because wanting to move, as long as we're still staying in our own center, wanting to move is fun and exciting and it's part of the dance of life. But when we're like leaning because we feel like we have to, that gets exhausting and like nobody wants to be in that kind of relationship, right? Thank you, Roz. Loving all these metaphors. Sometimes I feel like I like overdo them a little. I'm like, this is about relationships, I swear. I didn't come here to talk about curry. Hopefully this is making sense. A little bit more about curry and then I'll just talk about relationships. Okay, thank you. Okay, yes, thanks everybody. So another little curry example is like, let's say that you finally get to go out on a date with somebody you've been crushing on for a little while. Everyone's ordering curry. I love it. You're finally going on a date with somebody. You've been crushing on them for a while. You're all excited and you ask them where they want to go. And let's say you think you don't like curry, right? You ask them where they want to go and they're like, oh, this new curry place opened up that I was so excited about. Can we please go to curry? And you're like, okay. I don't think I like curry, but like, okay, let's try it, right? And so you go, there's a few different options of what might happen when you go to curry. You might go to curry and you might choke it down. It might be too spicy. It's like tearing up your insides, but you're like, this is fine because you like this person so much, right? Like you really want them to like you back. And so you eat the curry. Who is this? Roz is showing us his curry. That's hilarious. So you eat the curry, but you don't really like it, but you pretend that you do because you like this person or you think you like this person. You like the idea of this person. And so you choke it down. It doesn't taste good. It doesn't feel good in your stomach. Then maybe later you're like really needing to fart, but like, because all that curry that's disagreeing with you, but you're holding that in. The next thing you know, your stomach hurts, right? Like this curry is not good, but sometimes we do this, right? We pretend that it's fine because we like this person. Right? Another option is that you go and you try the curry and you say like, I don't usually like curry, but I'm willing to try. So sure. And then you go and it turns out you don't like it. And you just say, nope, still don't like curry. Or maybe you go and she orders this thing that you never would have thought to order. And it comes and it's like the best thing that you never had before. And so all of a sudden, you're like, maybe I do like curry. And then it starts you on this whole adventure of like trying all these different curries you might not have ordered before. And it turns out that you do actually love curry. You just hadn't tried the right one yet. Right. So there's a lot of different ways that, and again, this isn't about curry. This is about relationships, right? This is about being open to the movement along all these different spectra, but then also, allowing ourselves to move and like maybe allowing ourselves to try new things without going into like making ourselves sick because we're choking down something that does not feel good, right? Another thing, so I'm in small town America here in northern Michigan, and there is like one decent curry place here, right? And I would love to have like lots of curry options here in little Traverse City, Michigan. But there's like one place I have to drive a half an hour. Their hours are weird. And like, it's hard to find good curry around here, right? And sometimes depending on where you are, it can be hard to find the kinds of people that you want to be engaging in relationships with. Because small towns are tricky, right? Everybody's all up in your business. Yes, curry is sexual partners. And sometimes they're like hard to find depending on where you are, especially like a good one. Right? And sometimes you're like, oh, maybe I'll go give that Thai place a try again. Like, you don't really like it, but like you've been craving curry for so long that you're like,
fuck it, I'm gonna give the Thai cafe one more chance. And then you try it, you're like, yeah, nope, still not good. Curry and strip clubs run in packs. Yes. Sometimes we might really love curry, but we're just not in the mood for it right now. Right? Like, I love curry. It doesn't mean I want to eat curry in every moment of every day. So again, like, I think that this is just like the perfect analogy for how we engage in relationships. Sometimes, like, we wish we were in more open kitchen table poly kind of relationships, but we don't necessarily have access to those kinds of people as far as we know. I will say that I feel like for those of you who are really resonating with this, like, I wish there were more good quality people around me who want to be engaging in more conscious relationships. It's happening. There are like these waves. So if you're feeling really kind of alone right now, 2-3 years ago in Northern Michigan, I felt like I was the only person who had ever even heard of polyamory, much less read a book on it, much less like wanted to practice it in my actual life. Now there's like clubs sparking up all over the place and like Facebook groups. So it is expanding. So for those of you who are like really feeling that like there's no good curry, more and more people are learning how to make curry. More and more people are learning. Look, I mean, look at the fact that this festival is happening and you're all here, right? Like, these ideas are really spreading. So if you're in this place of like, what the hell, where are my people? They're coming. Just the fact that you're here, you're calling them in, right? So hang in there. Okay, so this brings us to the to co-creating the relationship container. And this is where we start asking our partners, what kind of curry do you like, right? And sometimes it is a matter of like, both people say they like spicy curry, and then you cook it and it's way too spicy for one of the people. So, okay, so let's tweak this recipe a little bit, right? Let's switch it up. Let's keep checking in. Did you like it? Do you like that? Was it a little spicy? Just a little too spicy? Maybe just a little more rice is all we need. Or like, we got to come up with a whole new recipe. Or like, I am not getting the nutrients I need. Maybe I need a little bit of red meat every now and then. And the other person's like, well, I'm a vegetarian. Okay, so what do we do with this? Can we find a recipe that is meeting everybody's needs? Or do we need to go get a little curry next door, or whatever it is, right? What kind of curry do you like? Nice. So I am really going to be building off. Was it Jordan and Megan who were before me? Jordan and. Okay, so this couple that was presenting before me, I forgot her name. Alexa, thank you. Jordan and Alexa, I tuned in towards the end and they were talking about regularly checking in. And this is like a huge, like, if I can recommend one thing to people in relationships, it's checking in regularly. So I recommend weekly. My partner and I right now, weekly or bi-weekly, my partner and I right now, we check in every other week, and it's on the schedule. It's every other Monday. And we commit to this for, say, like a month or two at a time. And it's in the schedule. If we have to reschedule, that's fine. But we don't just cancel, we reschedule. And checking in regularly. And I have a little list of things that you can go through. I've also sent a Google Doc with a really rough outline. I'm not a really techie person. I had a friend who was going to help me with some slides. But in the end, hi, Anne, I see you're here. Welcome. Anyway, in the end, I have like a really rough Google Doc that is going to be sent to you guys. This is because I am a recovering perfectionist. I am learning to let things go, even though they're not amazing. So there's a really super rough outline of this presentation in Google Docs that you guys are going to have access to that will hopefully help to outline that. But there's a few different things that I recommend that people check in on during these relationship meetings. First is to go through the COCO acronym. COCO stands for conscious, organic, committed, open relationships. This Coco framework was birthed through my friend. My friend and I were talking a lot. I am more geared towards being polyamorous, and I was living here in Michigan where it feels like everyone's monogamous, right? And my really good friend is more geared towards monogamy, and she was living in a place where everybody's polyamorous. And so we were both kind of like going against the norm, right? And we were talking a lot about how everybody's got their own ideas of what's best in relationships, but what if it's not that one is better than the other? One is not necessarily like inherently more conscious than the other. What if they're just different, right? And we can move along them in whatever way is best for everybody. And so that's where Coco kind of came from. So you don't have to figure out if you're polyamorous or monogamous. Just be Coco all the time. It turns out actually that my friend who was more monogamous is now dating a married man. And I am in a monogamous relationship right now, at least until the end of June. So both of us have kind of changed our preferred relationship structure, but we're both still Coco because we're still focusing on being conscious, organic, committed, and open. A lot of people think of a committed relationship as being opposite to an open relationship. They're not opposites. In fact, all of our relationships can be committed and open, right? It's not either or. We don't have to choose. Committed and open relationships. All of our relationships can be committed and open. We just get clear on what we're committing to. Right? Instead of this whole, like this old narrative of like, I love you so much, I'm going to love you till death do us part. Actually, how about like, I'm going to commit to bi-weekly relationship meetings for the next 2 months and we'll see how that goes. Right? So really getting clear on commitments. What are we committing to? There's an outline that I recommend when you're making commitments in your relationships. Make them SMART. It's SMART is for, oh my gosh, and now I'm like, this is kind of embarrassing. I'm totally blanking. I have to like look at my own notes. This is okay. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. So specifically, what are we committing to in our relationships? And let's not just be like, I'm gonna love you forever. Or like, I love you, I want to support you. Wait a minute. You want to support me? That's great. Thank you. Let's get clear on what that support can look like, right? And measurable. So not just like, I'm going to support you more. It's more like, I am going to wash the dishes twice in the next week. Let's get really specific, make it measurable. Yes, thank you. Attainable. Let's make these easy, right? Sometimes we like, I know I do this. I don't like to ask people for a lot, but I like to promise all these things, right? I love to say, I'm going to like, yeah, I can get really easily caught up in making big commitments, but let's like actually make them really intentionally make them very attainable. Relevant to whatever's going on in your relationship issues, to whatever like new curry recipe you're trying, right? Make sure that it's that the commitments are relevant. And this one is really important, time bound. Make sure that they are small chunks of time, right? So sometimes people will be like, we're going to open our relationship. And first of all, what does that even look like? What are we opening to exactly? And like, for how long? Or like, we're going to commit to whatever. Okay, for how long? And make it like nice little chunks of time, a couple weeks at a time, maybe like a month or two at most. So during your regular relationship check-ins, you're checking in on what are we committed to, right? And for a lot of us, I used to think I had commitment issues, right? It turns out I don't have commitment issues. I just, I need to feel free in my relationships. I need to feel free to be living my life. But there are still tons of commitments that I can make, and I can be really committed to a relationship and still feel free at the same time. So finding commitments that work for both of you or for all of you, however many there are, that are time bound. Make sure that you're only committing to things for like a couple weeks at a time. And then when you have your regular relationship meeting, which you're doing, if the commitment still feels good, then you can extend it. Right? It's better to commit to something for 2 weeks, stick to it, and then 2 weeks later say like, actually, this felt a little restrictive to me. I don't feel as free as I need to. So can we adjust this commitment? Right? And it's not necessarily like scrap it completely, but just like tweak it. Again, it's like a recipe that maybe you're both kind of liking the recipe, but some little tweaks might make it even more delicious. So just committing to a couple weeks at a time, and then you can extend. And then with open, a lot of people think that open relationships means that everybody's fucking everybody. Can we like please get over this like silly misconception? And let's embrace the idea that all of our relationships are open. And the most important things that we can be open to is the truth from our partners, the truth from the people we love. We are open to the truth. We are open to hearing. Sometimes if we're in a relationship with someone, and I have a friend who was doing this, she knows someone who was married to a woman. So they were a lesbian couple married to a woman, and then this woman decided to transition. And so there's a lot that can happen when people are deciding like, okay, I've been leaning like this a little too long. Right? Lean is getting really uncomfortable for me. So I actually need to move where I am. And sometimes when we're in a relationship where someone needs to move, it makes waves, right? And we can decide to either move with these waves or to go a different way, to agree that like maybe we don't need to be making this curry anymore. Yes, this came up for me in a relationship. Thank you, Chelsea. And like it comes up for a lot of people. We start dating someone, they tell us who they are, and then they change. And sometimes we can change with it. Sometimes we can move. Yeah, sometimes it's not always a gender thing. Sometimes somebody says, I identify as poly. But then they kind of start changing their mind. And the thing is, like, it sucks. And also, it's okay. People are allowed to move. People are allowed to change their minds. Yeah, sometimes we say, like, yeah, I want to be in an open relationship. Like, yeah, I want a spicy curry. Oh, whoa, that's way too spicy for me, right? And there's not that. And we tend to be like, you said you like it spicy. You told me that you love spice. It's like, well, yeah, well, turns out I don't, or it turns out I changed my mind. We're allowed to change our minds. This is the part of the beauty of the human experience. Think of who you were 5-10 years ago. For a lot of us, it's like, thank God I changed since then, right? Whew. Yes, it's a sliding scale, and we're constantly sliding. And often we want to put the people that we're in relationships, like we want to put them where they said that they would be, or where we think that we want them to be, or whatever else, but they get to move, and so do we. And it gets tricky. And that's why we have these regular relationship check-ins. That's why we're constantly checking in on the COCO framework. So there were 2 things I didn't touch on the COCO thing yet. First is conscious. So COCO is conscious, organic, committed, open relationships. Conscious relationships basically means like being aware of our intentions for being in the relationship. What are we doing here? Why are we here? Are we just like habitually here because we're used to it? Or are we intentional about what we're doing here, right? Are we just like popping drugs because we're bored with our lives? Or are we like taking medicines that are helping us to like expand our minds, right? So really being aware of our intentions, right? Not going through the motions. 333 is 434 here. Nice. Yes, so many revelations. Good. Yay. I love to hear this. Thank you. Yeah, so being intentional. And so for the relationship that I'm in personally right now, my intention is personal growth through the reflections that I get through my partner, right? So we're both committed to our own personal growth. And being intentional, checking in on that regularly. Like, is that still what we're doing here? Sometimes the intention for a relationship, like, let's be honest, sometimes people just want a physical connection. Not just, I don't like to say just, because physical connections are really beautiful. And sometimes maybe you're living in a small town where there's not a lot of curry, but there's this one curry that you like, that you really like. You probably shouldn't just live on that one curry, because like we need to get our nutrients from elsewhere. But there's this like one curry that like is good, and it feels good for you to have every now and then. Let's be real. Let's say my intention in this relationship is to have my physical needs met. And the relationship, the intentions don't have to be the same. As long as we're clear on what everybody's intentions are and they're aligned. Now, aligned are different than the same, right? So one person might have an intention to just have their physical needs met. Another person might be okay with that. And their intention is to, I'm trying to think of an intention that would be aligned with that, but not the same. And I'm blanking. Oh, I hate when I start like giving an example and then that's okay. I'm going to shake that off. I get nervous. I'm all sweaty. It's a good thing you guys can't smell through this screen, because I'm freaking out over here. I'm doing great.
You are doing great.
Thank you.
And I wish I could smell
So
you.
good. So good. I'm having so many revelations. It's like,
I wanna be in the same room with your energy.
Thank you. Okay. Yes.
Michael wants some curry. Like all the Indian curry.
Smells like curry. Yes.
I love my curry.
Whew. All right. So intentions don't have to be the same, but we want to be clear about them and just make sure that they're aligned and make sure that everybody's clear on our intentions. And then this organic, so conscious, organic, committed, open relationships. This organic piece is where we take biomimicry. It's like taking examples from nature and like implementing them into our relationships. And so we see in nature, we tend to think of like, I can't stand it really when people talk about failed relationships. There is no such thing as a failed relationship, okay? Out in nature, when we see a blade of grass that is born and then gets mowed down a week later, we don't say to that piece of grass, you're a failure. You should have been a big old oak tree. Guess what? In nature, there's only a few big oak trees in the forest. There's a lot of wildflowers that bloom for a couple days, a couple weeks. They're beautiful and they're blooming, and then they die. We don't go to that flower like, you failed. No, it was just only ever supposed to bloom for a couple weeks. It was only ever supposed to last a season. Right? Often we think of like failed relationships, but like there's no, in nature, the trees, the flowers, the grass, they don't fail. They just live their life. And then in their death, they actually still bring more nutrients into the soil, and they nurture the next little bit of life that's going to grow there. Right? So things that die in nature don't fail. They just decompose, and in doing so, add nutrients to the next wave of life. And so too with our relationships, right? Just because a relationship is nearing its end doesn't mean it's failing, right? Or just because it's going through a transition. We see transitions in nature all the time. In nature, we live with the seasons, right? There are times when everything is like blooming and growing and it's finally getting warmer. And then there are times when it's like, it's cold and we just want to hide away. And again, we don't look to Mother Nature. Well, as humans, we do kind of look to Mother Nature and be like, you're wrong, but that's a whole different workshop. In organic relationships, we we take inspiration from nature. We see how she goes through all these cycles, and so do we, right? Especially if you're in a female body, you're going through this cycle of life and growth, birth and growth, and like peak, and then decomposition and death. We go through this every 20 some days, 20 or 30 days, right? So we're feeling this in our bodies. And our relationships are naturally affected by these cycles, right? We are nature. We have nature in our bodies. Guys, you do too. Not quite as like drastically, but it's in you too. And it's important. I could also give a whole other workshop on the importance of menstrual cycles, whether you have one or not, working with them in your relationships, because like these things really deeply affect all of us, especially those of us in female bodies. So working with cycles, the cycles of nature, menstrual cycles, these are all important aspects of being in an organic relationship where things are allowed to bloom and then die and change, right? So at your weekly meetings, check in on, now it's good to really, from the very beginning, just like Alexa and Jordan were saying, from the very beginning, start these meetings. If you haven't already and you're already in a well-established relationship, it's okay. It's never too late to start. The sooner the better. Set aside a good chunk of time. My lover and I spend a few hours every 2 weeks going through this stuff. We keep saying, when I first was trying to get him to do it with me, I'm like, hey, I have this great idea. Can we do relationship? And if we are like just totally clear, then we can just use that time to make love. And he was like, all right, sweet. And we basically still every time it's like 3 hours, and he takes notes, and there's a lot to unpack here once you get in the habit of doing it. And it's so rich, and I so highly recommend it. So you can go through at your regular meetings, the COCO framework. What are our intentions? Are we being organic? What are we committed to? What are we open to? There's a lot there already. And then I actually have a few more things that we can go over. Desires, fears, and boundaries. And I'll try to get through these quickly so we have a little bit of time for questions at the end. First of all, does anybody need to like move their body? I do. Sometimes tune into your body. There's a lot of time spent on these screens. Yeah, so let's make sure we're all listening to our bodies while we're in our heads as well. Okay, so desires, fears, boundaries. These 3 things are really great in a few different situations. One, during the regular relationship check-ins, where we're talking about general fears and desires and boundaries in the relationship. These are also a really good framework to go through before you're going to do any sort of like sex scene, especially if you're thinking about getting kinky. Going through desires, fears, and boundaries is such a great way to build intimacy before the scene, before the last 3 questions are desires, fears, and boundaries. And again, wow, typing and talking at the same time is tricky. Thank you, Anne. These are a really great way to build intimacy, both in a relationship in general, and then also before you go into any sort of like sexy scene. I do somatic sexual healing, which means like I help people to heal from sexual trauma through like physical embodiment, physical touch. And I always make sure that I go through these, and even if you're not doing it in some sort of like professional, official capacity, even if it's just you and your partner, it's still really great to talk through these 3 things, because they really help to build a much safer and more secure container. So first, talk about first talk about desires. And it doesn't matter what order you do these in, actually, whatever order is fine. But first, I'm going to talk about desires. So it's really important that people feel that their desires are welcome. A key piece with this is that just because a desire is expressed, that does not mean it needs to be fulfilled, right? It's so many of us hold back on expressing our full desire because we're afraid of how it's going to be received. Maybe we're afraid that somebody's going to feel pressure to fulfill that desire. I know sometimes I still struggle with this. When a partner tells me a desire they have, I have this natural tendency to like want to fulfill their desire, right? When we love somebody and they want something, generally we want to give it to them. And like, that's good, except that so many of us have grown up in these cultures where we weren't taught to communicate, and we were taught that like codependency is normal. And so somebody expresses a desire and we feel this, like, we might feel a desire to fulfill that desire, or we might feel an obligation. We want to fulfill the desires that everybody wants to be fulfilling, but we don't want to be doing this out of a sense of obligation, right? So really super important to create a space where people can share their desires without anyone feeling any pressure to fulfill them, right? And then sometimes these desires come out that, like, turns out, no, I don't want to fulfill that desire for you, but I'm glad to know that you have it. And actually, I know somebody who does that sort of thing, right? Or I had a lover once who expressed a desire for something kinky that was like outside of my comfort zone, that I was like, oh, interesting. Okay, thank you for sharing. And I had like some resistance, and for a while I did not fulfill that desire because because I didn't want to, right? And that was fine. And just leaving the space for desires to be expressed, but they don't have to be fulfilled. In fact, like, I really encourage people sometimes to come up with like these desires that are so far out there, that are like, that you think are like so weird, just to give your partner a chance to say, nah, I don't want to do that. Nope. Sometimes that can be so liberating, to like come up with some things, like practice saying no to each other and having it just be okay. This is like revolution. For some reason, we live in a world where this is revolutionary, right? To express desires and to say no is somehow a revolution, but it is, and it's liberating. And yeah, I really get to where you're creating a container where all the desires can be expressed. They don't have to be fulfilled. Same thing with fears. Exact same thing with fear. Often the fear and the desire are like opposite edges of a knife blade, right? They're basically the same thing, right? So this thing that I really want, I'm also kind of terrified of, right? This happens in life and in sex. Like, we kind of want something, but we're like, but it's also kind of scary, right? Often our desires and our fears are so close. And there's a lot of talk in like new age circles and like, all this consciousness stuff about fear being a lower vibration. That might be true, maybe, but also fear is a really basic human experience. Like, it's a quintessential part of the human experience. So when I see people being like, oh, don't be in fear, don't live in fear, don't like let it rule your life, but by all means allow yourself to feel it and express it. Sometimes even just the expression of the fear can help it to dissipate, right? But again, it's really important that when someone expresses a fear to you, we have this natural tendency, again, when it's with someone that we really love, we have this tendency to be like, oh, you don't have to be afraid of that, don't worry. Like, let's say somebody wants to try anal sex for the first time, right? I have a desire to experience pleasure during anal sex. I have a fear that this is going to hurt. I have a fear that I'm going to shit the bed. I have all these fears, but I also still have this same desire. So I desire anal sex and I'm afraid of it. And both of these things are true. And when we have someone saying, oh, don't, like, let's say, in going with this example, I'm just going to run with it. I have a desire for anal sex, but I'm afraid I'm going to shit the bed. When someone says, oh no, don't worry, you don't need to worry about that, it doesn't make the fear go away, right? You're still kind of afraid you're going to get shit everywhere. And when someone's like, you don't have to be afraid, there's this like overly caretaking, don't worry, don't feel that fear. it's still there. Right? And yeah, it can be nice to hear from a partner that like, if you do shit the bed, don't worry, there's a shower nearby. Like all these things can be comforting, but at the same time, if we don't allow the fear to just be there, then it ends up like kind of suppressed. And often guess what happens with when fears are suppressed? They're realized. Right? So just letting them be there, plastic wrap, put down a tarp. I'm sure there's like a million solutions that can help people feel a little bit safer, but also like the fear is allowed to just be there. Right? So letting the desire, creating a space in these weekly check-ins where all of the desires can just be there. And all of the fears can just be there. We don't have to take care of them. We don't have to fix them. Sometimes you will find that like once you realize that your partner has a desire, oh, okay, I'm open to that. So sometimes the desires are realized. Sometimes the fears are either alleviated or realized. And once we get in a space where we're regularly creating these containers where all this stuff is allowed to just be, and then we see if it's realized, or we see if it goes away, or we just let it be there, it can really help to create a sense of safety for everybody. And also this like deepening realization that we don't have to fix things. We don't have to fix our partners. We don't have to fulfill things. Things are just allowed to just be there. Right? And then the last thing, in the last few minutes, boundaries. Boundaries are like, again, I could do an hour on this. Boundaries are not rule. Yes, safety is the sweet spot. When people feel safe, then we can really open up. There's so much more pleasure that can be experienced when people feel safe. And this doesn't mean that the fears aren't there. It means that they're just allowed to be there. So boundaries. Boundaries are not rules about what other people are and aren't allowed to do, right? Boundaries are for us. Each individual creates their boundaries, creates a safe place to play. It's a playing field. So if you, there's been, and I don't know where these studies come from or if they're just made up, but it just seems to make sense to me. So I'm going to run with it. There's been studies or observations or whatever of children around a school, right? And when there's a lot of just like woods, when they go outside for recess and it opens into like a field with woods beyond, children will stay close to the school because it feels safer, right? Because the teacher's nearby, they know that like that the woods are way out there, the scary stuff is way out there, so they stay close to the school. But if there is a fence built around the school, if there's some sort of boundary, kids will naturally go and play right at the edges, right? Because then they feel like they can like kind of get away from their teacher, and they're like, they're getting close to the boundary, but they still feel safe, right? And this is the idea behind boundaries in relationships, is that we're creating a safe place, and then we can go to the edges. Then we can play. Like sometimes it turns out that there's a desire of mine that's real close to your fence. When I know where your fence is, then I feel safe exploring this desire, that I know where your fence is. And so I know I can stay here, right? Whereas if I just went like charging towards my desire without having any idea of where you want me to stop, then I don't feel safe in my exploration, and you don't feel safe, without the boundaries. So boundaries are not like rules that we use to tell other people what they should and shouldn't do. Boundaries are what helps us to establish a safe place to play. So when you are establishing boundaries, it's more about like, I think often we think of boundaries as being like restrictions, rules, right? And they're similar sort of, except that if we can kind of reframe mentally from like rules that like other people should and shouldn't do, and try to expand it into like, it can be expansion of the play zone, of the play place. I know for me, I do not like to be penetrated in any way unless there's like a clear, may I please penetrate you? And then it's a yes, or unless I ask for it. So for me, a boundary with all of my sexual partners is do not penetrate me unless I have asked you explicitly, or you have asked if you can and given me a moment to feel into my yoni, get out of my head about all the thoughts about why I should be open to this, and drop into my yoni and feel, is this a yes or no? So this is a boundary for me that ever since I started setting this with my partners, I notice how much more I'm able to open, because whenever I have a partner who's like touching me externally, I'm not like, am I ready? Am I ready to be penetrated? Is he going to? Is, you know, like, I can just relax into enjoying whatever's happening on the outside of me and just enjoy that without having to be like, am I ready? Is he wanting more from me? Is he going to before I'm ready? All of that is taken off the table with this boundary that allows both of us to expand and to have like a greater place to play. So I really invite you to explore boundaries with your partner as you're discussing desires and fears, because in this playground analogy, the desires are like what we want to do out there, right? And the fears are what we're afraid of out there. And the boundary helps us to expand into a play place that is like more fun for all of us, because this is like the thing that is both really beautiful and really annoying about life, is that our desires and our fears are all like out there. And in a way it's amazing, and in a way it's terrifying. And so how can we create a space of safety? And then again, boundaries change, just like our positions on all these spectra, right? The boundaries are allowed to change. People are allowed to change their minds, right? Somebody says, here is the boundary. Here is what I like in a curry, right? And then it's like, oh shit, that was way spicier than I thought. Can we move this boundary a little bit? How can we adjust this boundary so that everybody can feel safe again and again and again? And it takes constantly checking in, regularly checking in. So yes, I don't know what's going on in the chat over there. I just tried to look at it and like, I'm just going to let that go. I'm glad you guys are having fun.
You're amazing. Yeah, we just, a whole thing. We're just looking at Em beautifully napping with this beautiful puppy locked up in Canada.
Nice.
It's very sweet.
Okay. Well, that's just about time. That is just about exactly time. I was hoping to have time for questions and things. Thank you, Em. Thanks everybody for being here. Does anybody, I don't know if we have like a moment for some questions.
We do. I think it'd be awesome to have a few questions.
Okay.
Yeah, Michael, do you have some?
Chelsea, I loved your question, and I don't think it was in the chat, so I don't think Katie got a chance to hear the question. It was about how to define freedom and commitment in relationship, and I think it is like very, very important I mean, that's important for a lot of us, for me too. So I'd love to hear the answer on your question. Maybe you can articulate it.
Yeah, I said I want freedom and commitment in a relationship, which is possible, but sometimes it's hard to know when something comes up, or until something comes up. Do you have something that you used to talk about it ahead of time? So, for instance, like I was in a partnership where, like we ended up going to Burning Man, and that's how we kind of discovered a lot of things. But not every couple gets the opportunity to just like explore like is this okay? Is this not okay? So do you have like a different thing that you use, or like a set of like principles or things that you kind of like guidelines?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Freedom and openness, freedom and commitments, again, sometimes they seem like opposites, and sometimes they are. This is the thing about deciding to engage in relationships that that value freedom, is that sometimes somebody makes us a curry that's really really spicy, and sometimes we have to eat it to know, like, oh whoa, that was too spicy, and sometimes like it burns our lips for a while. And I think there's a lot to be said for checking in regularly to try to make sure that we're tweaking the recipe and it's not too spicy. And then also, there's something to be said for the fact that, like, every now and then we're going to eat a curry that's going to hurt our lips. And like, part this is part of what happens when we're people who love curry, when we're people who are open to the exploration. So leaving space for the fact that, like, sometimes no matter how much talking and tools and whatever else we use, sometimes there's gonna be stuff that comes up that sucks. And like, sometimes there's nothing that we can do in this life to like fully see and prevent all the things that might hurt. So I guess in a way I'm like kind of wanting to say that, like, there are tools, and actually a lot of like go through this framework, the COPA, the desires, the fears, the boundaries. If you're regularly checking in about desires and fears, and everybody knows what their partner's desires and fears are, that can really help to make sure that we're tweaking a recipe, so to speak. But then sometimes it's like, if you're meeting every 2 weeks, and the thing about something like Burning Man is that it's like a lot happens really fast. And even if you are checking in weekly, sometimes a lot can happen in one day. And if you're regularly checking in about desires and fears and boundaries, then the chances of something really rocking your world will be decreased, but the chances never really go away, right? This is part of being a human and engaging in relationships, is that, like, we can't plan for everything, and we can't prevent all the heartache, and like, that's sort of okay. Dan likes some sweetness in his curry.
I have a question. I
Yeah.
actually, I've all my life, I've a lot more been, I've been amorous, but I've always been prone to monogamy in my relationships. And I just have always had this like relationship pattern of monogamous, and coupled with my attachment styles, I haven't been happy with the outcome so far. And so one of the things I decided, because I was on this app called The Pattern, it kept giving me the same freaking answer every day about what kind of, what I like in a partner. I'm like, man, I'm so tired of reading this thing that says I like to have a committed partner, and I like to have like this one person that makes me feel like I'm, the one, and we're in this like essentially really monogamous thing. And I decided that I think it's more responsible as a sovereign for me to be in a place right now of hierarchical poly. And that's where, if I'm with someone that I like am really, really endeared to, that's going to be my primary thing that would be most possibly and likely even monogamous. But at the same time, just to create the synergy for two beings engaged in true sovereignty and unconditional love, is just to have a framework of hierarchical polyamory as the operating modus for our exchanges with people. When we go out dancing, it's, if we're going to dance with somebody, that's cool. We don't get hung up about it. Is my beloved having fun? Yes, they are. Oh, well, I'm happy as hell. you know, and I'd love to hear your comments and maybe reflections on that.
Okay. So it wasn't so much a question, just kind of generally looking for reflections.
Yeah, I'm sorting it out, so I definitely would love to hear your expert opinion about, you know, does this sound like perhaps a valid path, or could it have pitfalls?
There's a billion valid paths, and it's whatever works for you. I will say that sometimes I've been finding that the exploration of what is monogamy can be just as rich as what is polyamory, right? So for as many different ways as there are to be poly, there's a million different ways to be monogamous too. You know, are we allowed to dance with other people? What about flirting? I know for me sometimes, before I discovered polyamory, I have a flirtatious personality. I flirt with everybody. I like can't help it. And then when I feel like am I flirting with someone, then I feel guilty or whatever it is. So I can be in a monogamous relationship for short periods of time if I feel free to be like flirtatious and be engaging. And so it sounds to me like there's a really rich did I lose Richard? Oh, Michael, there you are. Okay, sorry, Michael. Okay, just switch screens on me for some reason. There's a really rich playing field within monogamy as well. What does this look like? Are we sexually monogamous, but then like where does flirting fall? Where does dancing fall? Where does like, I mean, what about even like dates? Can we go on dates with other people? Really navigating that within your primary relationship. And then also I encourage everybody who's engaging in hierarchical poly. And for those of you who are wondering, that's where like, there's like one relationship that is the most important, and that's the one that's prioritized. And then the other ones are like secondary relationships. And I encourage people to be very careful and very conscientious with your secondary partners, because I have been a secondary partner a number of times. And sometimes it's like, oh, there's a little bit of drama in the primary relationship. So people tend to be like, we're going to stop seeing other people until we get straight here in the primary relationship, which is valid. And that's a valid thing to do. But just when you're exploring hierarchy, make sure that there might be a hierarchy in where you are devoting your time and energy. But let's make sure that there's not a hierarchy in terms of like who deserves the most love and care and respect. And
Absolutely.
Because sometimes it's like, I see this a lot in hierarchical relationships where it's like, oh, sorry, secondary, I need to focus on my primary right now, which is valid. And sometimes people do really need to do that, but taking a lot of care in the letting go of the secondary and making sure that they're feeling like supported in the letting go of that, because I've been hurt a number of times by people who were really into me and really excited about me until their wife said, never mind. And then it was like this door came like slammed in my face. And it was like, I was standing there on the other side of the door, like, So just
the sovereignty from unconditional love that behavior wouldn't be allowed in the case of unconditional love, where I treat all of my people that I have partnerships with from a place of unconditional love. I could never do that to someone.
Yeah.
It's a matter of time and attention, but yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's like, you know, polyamory is really not, it's pretty complicated.
Very.
Yes.
I often see a lot of people. I have a dear friend and client right now who is trying to balance like 4 different relationships. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, right? And if you're thinking that it can just be a lot of fun and you're not willing to put in the work, that's going to come back to you, right? be thinking about like having regular relationship meetings with all your partners. And if you have 4 partners and you're trying to check in every couple weeks, that's going to take up a lot of space in your schedule, right? And I find a lot of people are like, I don't have time for that. Like, if you don't have time to check in for a couple hours once every couple weeks, you don't have time to be in that relationship, right? So for as many relationships as you're juggling that are like fun and exciting, also be making sure that you're taking the time for the real stuff. And if you don't have time to be checking in about the real stuff, then you might not have time to be in that relationship at all.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
very profound.
Yeah, this is an amazing conversation. And I do see some questions in the chat. So Katie, can people connect with you on Instagram if they want to go deeper?
Yes. Yep. I have Instagram. I also, we have a Facebook group called Cocoa Nuts.
Yeah.
Conscious relationships, and it's a really supportive group. So questions in there often get like a really beautiful array of responses, in addition to my own. Yeah, so you can connect with me on Instagram or in the Facebook group. Oh yeah, and I'm just now seeing a bunch of these questions. Shoot, and I think we're probably running out of time here. Does that sound about right, Chelsea?
Yes, we are a few minutes over. But I do recommend continuing to, if you want to, you can stay on and chat with people, or you can take these into the Facebook group. I think that would be a great place.
Yeah, I think so. I'm actually like sort of homeless at the moment, and I borrowed my friend's house for this
Okay.
presentation, and he's home now. So I want to honor his space. So I gotta get going here pretty soon, but would love to see these questions. I'm gonna see if I can like copy and paste them somehow. And
Okay, cool. Yeah,
yeah.
we can send them
Okay,
to
and
you.
there's some links for the groups, and
Beautiful.
I'd love to address some of these further. Thank you, everybody. It's
Amazing.
been really fun for me.
Can we all take ourselves off of mute and give Katie a big thank you and an ashtahay?
Thank you.
To
Ashta